Prayer didn't become difficult because your faith weakened. It became difficult because your mind was trained to no longer be able to stay quiet long enough to pray. I know that sounds strange. We always treat the difficulty of praying as a spiritual problem, a lack of discipline, a lack of faith, a lack of willpower. But what if the problem isn't in your soul? What if it's in your attention? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, this is going to make absolute sense. And more than that, your ability to truly pray can start to return, not after years of spiritual struggle. Today, that prayer that feels dry, distracted, and mechanical can go back to being what it always was, a place of presence. Your problem with prayer might not be with God. It might be with the speed at which your mind has learned to live, and a 2,000-year-old scene of a man who had more reason than anyone to be busy explains exactly what to do about this. Look at what happens when you close your eyes to pray, and in 30 seconds, your mind has already jumped to 50 different places. Your mind is doing exactly what it was trained to do for years. For years, you have taught your brain to live at a specific speed. Every notification, every short video, every tab switch, every swipe delivered a new stimulus every few seconds. Your brain learned to expect that. It learned that staying still is discomfort, and that the solution to that discomfort is always one tap away. Prayer operates at the exact opposite speed. It is slow. It requires lingering. It asks you to stay in one place with one single presence without looking for the next stimulus. And your mind, trained to race, simply no longer knows how to do that. It treats the quietness of prayer the way it treats any pause, as a void that urgently needs to be filled. So when you pray and your mind races, it isn't betraying you. It is doing what you spent years teaching it to do. The problem isn't your heart. It is the gear your head is stuck in. Imagine someone hands you a cup and asks you to fill it with clean water. Easy, right? You put it under the faucet, wait a moment, and the cup fills up. Now imagine they tell you to fill that same cup under a waterfall, a torrent crashing down with full force. What happens? The water hits the cup and splashes everywhere. The cup is ripped from your hand. It doesn't matter how much water is falling, and a lot is falling. You can't fill a thing. The volume is there, but the sheer force of the torrent prevents anything from settling. You cannot receive under a waterfall. Prayer is the cup. It is an act of receiving. You come to God to be filled with presence, with peace, with direction, but your mind today lives under a waterfall. Information, notifications, worries, stimuli, everything crashing down all at once, all day long, and then you try to pray in that torrent and get frustrated because the cup doesn't fill. You conclude that there is something wrong with your faith. There is no lack of water. There is a lack of a place where the water can finally settle. There is nothing wrong with you. You are just trying to receive something deep in the middle of a waterfall. And to fill the cup, you don't need more water. You need to step out from under the torrent. Keep this image of the cup. It explains everything that comes next. You close your eyes. Father, and it's gone. Your mind remembers the email, the bill, the text you forgot to send, what that person said, that video you saw, a random melody that starts playing out of nowhere. 30 seconds. That was how long it lasted before the waterfall ripped you away. You open your eyes, sigh, and think, I'm terrible at this, and you pick up your phone. There are two ways to approach prayer, and the difference between them changes everything. The first is the task way. You treat prayer as just another item on the to-do list, something to do right, to accomplish, to cross off. You arrive in a rush, recite the requests, feel like it didn't work, and leave with a slight guilt. In this mode, prayer is a transaction. You speak, wait for a result, and measure success by your concentration. The second is the presence way. Here, prayer is not a thing you execute. It is a place where you stay. You don't come to deliver a report to God. You come to be with Him. And when your mind wanders, because it will wander, you don't give up or condemn yourself. You simply, gently return. The heart of prayer is in that patient return every time you realize your mind has drifted. Most people give up on prayer because they are playing the wrong game. They think praying well means never getting distracted. But praying well was never about flawless concentration. It's about the return. Every time your mind wanders and you bring it back to His presence, that is not a failure in prayer. That is the prayer. And there is something liberating in understanding this. It means you were never bad at praying. You were just measuring the wrong thing. You counted distractions as defeats, when every return was actually a quiet victory, a muscle that gets stronger precisely in the effort of coming back. The ancient monks knew this centuries ago. They called the wandering mind something natural, expected, and they treated the act of returning with gentleness, not punishment. Prayer isn't remaining perfectly still. It's the patient dance of leaving and returning until returning becomes easier than wandering away. There is a brief scene in the Gospel of Mark that, when you understand the context, disarms all your guilt. In chapter 1, Jesus had just lived a crushing day. An entire city crowded at the door of the house where he was staying. He healed, taught, cast out, attended to, and sustained multitudes until nightfall. It was the ancient equivalent of a day with 1,000 notifications, endless demands, people pulling from every side, stimulation pushed to the absolute limit. And look at what is written next. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Stop and feel the weight of that. Jesus, the Son of God, the one who had the most perfect connection with the Father that ever existed. Even he didn't try to pray in the middle of the crowd. He got up before the sun, left the noise behind, and went to a solitary place, a place with zero stimulation, so he could be in the presence of the Father. If even Jesus needed to step out from under the waterfall to pray, what made you think you could pray with the feed scrolling right next to you? It is not a weakness of yours to need silence to pray. It is design. Presence has always needed a quiet place to happen. And that is exactly why this channel exists, to help you reclaim those quiet places the world has stolen from you. If this idea is making sense to you, subscribe here. It isn't just following another channel. It is choosing to have, in the middle of your loud feed, a slow voice reminding you to step out of the torrent every once in a while. I'm going to be direct about something that bothers me. We have learned to blame ourselves spiritually for a problem that, in large part, is behavioral. You walk away from a distracted prayer and think, I need to love God more, when what you might actually need is to stop filling your head with noise in the 16 hours prior to that prayer. Honestly, I lived this for a long time. I would scroll my feed until the very last second before closing my eyes to pray, and then I wondered why the prayer felt so distant, so mechanical. I treated prayer as the problem when the problem was everything I let in before it. I was asking God for presence with a mind that I myself had left in shreds all day long. And here I need to be very direct with you. Your dry prayer is not proof that God is distant. Your wandering mind is not proof that your faith is weak. Your difficulty sitting still is not proof that you are a worse Christian. It is proof of one thing only. You are trying to find the presence of God with an attention span that has been shattered by everything you consume. And you do not fix that with more guilt. You fix it by stepping out of the torrent. But what does this mean in practice on a real morning with your real life? Because step out of the torrent can't just be a pretty phrase. Don't think of this as a prayer technique. Think of it as a door, a few minutes of transition between the noise of the world and the presence of God, so that your mind has time to decelerate before trying to receive. It works something like this. Before you pray, you don't run straight from the screen into prayer. You create a small corridor of silence. You leave the phone in another room, out of reach. You sit down. And for a minute or two, you don't even try to pray yet. You just breathe and let the dust settle. Your mind will keep spinning at first with the leftovers of the day, and that's okay. You don't fight it. You just wait. The same way splashing water needs a moment to stop splashing when you pull the cup out of the waterfall. And then, when the internal speed starts to yield, you don't come to God with a list. You come with one single, simple sentence, and you stay on it. Here I am. I just want to be with you. And when your mind wanders, and it will wander, you don't get irritated. You don't give up. You return to the sentence, gently, again. That returning is the entire heart of the thing. And there is one time of day that changes almost everything in this practice, before the screen. If the first thing that enters your mind in the morning is the feed, you have already thrown yourself under the waterfall before even trying to pray. But if you give your mind a few minutes of quiet before the world starts pouring in, you are praying from inside a still cup, not a cup being ripped away. The exact same prayer, in two completely different states of mind. It isn't that God changed. It's that the cup was finally still enough to receive. It's not about praying for an hour. It's about taking the cup out of the waterfall for a few minutes every day until your mind remembers how to receive. Here is the turning point that lifts a massive weight off your shoulders. You spent years imagining that God was grading your prayers, that He measured your concentration, counted your distractions, and grew disappointed when your mind wandered. As if prayer were a focus test, and you were constantly getting a failing grade. But there is no test. There is no grade. A loving father does not run a stopwatch on how well his child pays attention when they come sit on his lap. He is just happy the child came. The child's distraction does not offend the father. The child's presence delights the father. Prayer was never a performance of perfect attention that you had to get right. It has always been a child returning to the Father's presence in whatever messy, distracted way they can manage. God is not waiting for your mind to be flawless. He is happy that you sat down. And every time you get distracted in return, it doesn't subtract points. It is literally the relationship happening. Think about what this changes in practice. You no longer need to prepare yourself to pray like someone preparing for an exam. You don't need to wait until you feel sufficiently spiritual, sufficiently focused, sufficiently worthy. You can show up exhausted, scattered, with a full head in the middle of chaos. And it counts as prayer just the same. Maybe it counts even more, because it is exactly in that state that God's presence is most needed. The Father never asked for your best version at the door. He only asked that you would come. When you truly believe this, the pressure comes off. And without the pressure, quietness is much easier to find. On the other side, prayer looks like something else entirely. It stops being a task you complete out of guilt and goes back to being a place you run to. Not run to in the sense of escaping, run to in the sense of taking a breath. In the middle of a chaotic day, you find yourself seeking out those quiet minutes, not out of obligation, but because it is where you finally feel whole. The rush slows down. The internal noise lowers. That feeling of always being somewhat divided, somewhat focused on the next thing, gives way to a more solid presence. You start noticing God in places where there used to be only noise. On a walk, washing dishes in silence, in a gap you didn't fill with a screen. Prayer stops feeling like a bad phone call full of static and returns to feeling like a conversation between people who know each other. Not because you became holier, because you finally stepped out of the waterfall. Right at the beginning, I told you that prayer didn't become difficult because your faith weakened, but because your mind forgot how to be quiet. I want to close by returning to the cup. This whole time you thought the problem was a lack of water, that you needed more faith, more discipline, more spiritual effort to fill the cup. But the water was never missing. God was always pouring. What was missing was a quiet place where the cup could stop being ripped from your hand. The presence you are looking for has always been available. It just becomes audible again when the noise goes down. The water has always been falling. You just needed to step out of the torrent to finally receive it. I'm not going to tell you to pray an hour a day starting tomorrow. That would just become another demand under the waterfall. The invitation is smaller and more possible. For today, sometime before you go to sleep, set aside 2 minutes. Put your phone far away. Don't try to pray a list. Don't try to resolve anything. Just sit in the silence, let the dust of the day settle, and when the speed yields a little, say one single phrase, "Here I am," and stay on it. Maybe nothing spectacular will happen the first time. That's fine. The cup takes a moment to stop splashing. Presence does not compete with rush, but if something quiets down inside you, even just slightly, stay with that. Let it settle, and come back tomorrow, and the next day, until prayer stops being a fight against your own mind and goes back to being the quietest and fullest place in your day. And if you know someone who gave up on prayer thinking they lost their faith, when in reality they just lost their silence, send this video to that person. It might be the door they needed to come back.